He shoved her into the wall so hard the coat rack fell over. That was the first thing anyone in the parking lot of Millie's roadside diner heard that Tuesday afternoon. Not shouting, not cursing, just the hollow crack of a woman's shoulder hitting painted cinder block, and then the sound of Tyler Vaughn's voice, low and tight and razor mean, telling Lena she had better smile when she walked back in there, or he would give her something real to cry about. Nobody in the parking lot moved. Nobody said a word. Lena straightened her uniform with both hands, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and walked back through the diner's rear door like nothing had happened, like she'd just stepped out for a breath of fresh air. If you've ever looked at someone and known, not suspected, not wondered, but known, that something terrible was happening to them, then you already understand what this story is about. Stay with us until the end. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. Because these stories travel, and we want to see exactly how far this one goes. The Ironback riders pulled into Millie's roadside diner at 12:47 on a Wednesday in late October, 8 bikes in a loose formation, and they were loud the way a coming storm is loud. You heard them before you saw them, and once you saw them, you didn't look away fast. Grant Mercer led the column. He always did. He was 53 years old, built like a man who had been broken and rebuilt several times over, wide through the shoulders, with a jaw that looked like it had been cut from a highway median. His beard had gone mostly gray. There were 2 inches of scar tissue running from his left cheekbone toward his ear, a souvenir from a roadway altercation in 1999 that he never talked about in detail. His cut, the leather vest every Ironback rider wore, was faded to the color of old motor oil, and the patches on it told anyone who knew how to read them that this was not a man who had wandered into the life accidentally. He'd been riding since he was 16. He'd buried 4 friends. He'd lost 1 marriage and held on to another until his wife, Carla, passed from cancer 8 years ago. He had 1 daughter, 28 years old, who had inherited exactly none of his silence and absolutely all of his attention to detail. That was Avery. She rode her own bike, a matte black Sportster she'd rebuilt herself in Grant's garage the summer after her mother died, and she pulled in 2 positions behind her father with the same unhurried authority he carried. She was lean and quick-eyed, with her mother's cheekbones and her father's stubborn set to the mouth. She wore no makeup on rides. Her dark hair was pulled back under a bandana. She had a mechanical engineering degree from a state university that she rarely mentioned, and a reputation inside the Ironback community as someone who noticed things other people didn't bother to. She noticed Lena Brooks before she even got off her bike. The diner was a low-slung building off Route 9, the kind of place that had been there since before the interstate bypassed it. Red vinyl booths, a counter with swivel stools, a pie case that rotated slowly under fluorescent light. The parking lot was cracked asphalt and weeds pushing through at the edges. A hand-lettered sign in the window said, "Daily Special, Beef Stew, $7.99. Avery killed her engine and watched the young woman in the white uniform push through the front door and hold it open for an older couple coming out. The woman, she couldn't have been more than 25, moved with the particular carefulness of someone managing pain. Not limping, nothing so obvious as that. But the way she turned her body when she held the door, keeping her left side angled away. The way her right hand did most of the work. Small things. The kind of small things that added up to something. Avery swung her leg off the bike and said nothing. Her father was already heading toward the entrance, and the rest of the club followed in the way they always did. Not a crowd, not a mob, just 8 adults who happened to move in the same direction at the same time. People in diners sometimes went still when the Ironback riders walked in. Some of them reached for their phones, some of them just watched. Grant had long since stopped noticing. Avery had learned, watching him, that the right response to other people's discomfort was not to perform harmlessness, but to simply be whatever you actually were and let them adjust. They took 2 booths and the section of counter between them. Millie's was less than half full, a pair of retired men playing checkers near the window, a young mother with a toddler in a high chair, a trucker working through a plate of eggs at the counter. The young woman in the white uniform came to their section. "Welcome in," she said. Her voice was steady, professional. "Can I get you all some coffee to start?" Grant looked up at her. He had a way of looking at people that was not unkind but was very, very direct. The kind of look that made most people feel slightly assessed. Coffee'd be good, he said. Thank you. She moved efficiently. She had a practiced smile, the kind you develop when smiling is part of the job description, and you've been doing it long enough that it no longer costs you anything. Her name tag said Lena. She was pretty in an exhausted way, with dark circles under her eyes that foundation hadn't fully covered, and she wore her sleeves down despite the warmth of the diner, the cuffs buttoned at the wrist. Avery watched her pour coffee for the two men at the counter end without spilling a drop. She watched her take the toddler's fallen spoon off the floor and replace it without being asked. She watched the way Lena's left arm moved, or didn't move, when she carried the coffee carafe. She kept her arm tucked in close to her torso, like it hurt to extend it fully. Avery pulled out her menu and pretended to read it. Her writing partner, a man named Dex, 44, built like a refrigerator, former Army Corps of Engineers, settled in beside her and said quietly, without looking up, "You got that look." "What look?" "The one where you're not reading the menu." "I'm reading the menu." "You're looking over the menu," Dex said. "That's different." Avery set the menu down. "The waitress, left arm, she's favoring it." Dex was quiet for a moment. He picked up his coffee when Lena came around to fill his cup. He thanked her. He watched her move to the next person. "Could be an old injury," he said when she was out of range. "Could be," Avery said. She left it there. She wasn't the kind of person who leaped to conclusions, and she didn't like people who did. But she also wasn't the kind of person who noticed something and then told herself she hadn't. They ordered. Lena moved between their tables with efficient grace, refilling cups, checking on the toddler's mother, delivering plates from the kitchen pass-through with the speed of someone who had been doing this particular job long enough to do it in her sleep. She didn't talk much beyond the functional requirements of service. She didn't linger. When someone made a small joke about the weather, she smiled politely and kept moving. Avery was most of the way through her club sandwich when it happened. The bell above the front door rang. A man walked in. He was around 30, maybe 32, with close-cropped hair and the kind of build that came from deliberate gym work rather than labor. Thick through the chest, narrow through the waist, the build of someone who cared how he looked. He wore a clean flannel shirt and dark jeans and work boots that had never seen actual work. He was good-looking in a way that was probably very useful to him in certain situations. He stood in the doorway and scanned the diner until he found what he was looking for. The moment Lena came out of the kitchen with a tray of water glasses, he found her. Something happened to the room. It wasn't a sound or a movement. It was more like a change in pressure, the subtle, atmospheric shift of something that was about to be bad. Avery felt it. She saw from the corner of her eye her father's hand stop moving on his coffee cup. Lena saw the man. Her face did not change expression. That was, Avery would think later, the most telling thing. Not fear, not anger, not surprise. Nothing. A face that had practiced becoming nothing so many times that it had become automatic. The man walked to the counter and sat down 2 stools from the trucker, still looking at Lena. He didn't pick up a menu. He didn't look at the specials board. He just sat and looked at her the way you look at something you own. Lena set the water glasses down at the nearest table and walked to the counter. She stood across from him with the professional distance of someone staying behind a barrier that wasn't there. "Tyler," she said, "you shouldn't be here." "I was in the neighborhood." His voice was calm, conversational, friendly even, in the way of someone who had practiced sounding reasonable for an audience. "Thought I'd get some coffee. That a problem?" "There's an order." "I know what there is," he said, still smiling. "I'm just getting coffee, Lena. Relax." The trucker at the counter glanced over, registered the tension, and went back to his eggs. Avery set her sandwich down. She looked at her father. Grant's eyes were already on Tyler Vaughn. Grant's expression hadn't changed, still the same flat, patient assessment he gave most things. But his right hand had moved off the table and down to his knee. It was a small tell that Avery had learned to read years ago. It meant, "I see it." She gave a tiny nod. He gave a tiny nod back. Lena poured coffee for Tyler without speaking. Her hands were steady. Avery noted that too. The hands were steady, but the shoulders had risen slightly toward her ears, the way they rise when every muscle in your body is braced. "You look tired," Tyler said. He said it like a compliment, like concern. "You working doubles again?" "I'm working." Right. He wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. Landlord called me, by the way. Said you're 2 weeks behind. Lena's jaw tightened. That's not your business anymore. I'm just trying to help. He tilted his head slightly. I hate thinking about you struggling. You know that. Tyler, you need to leave. He looked around the diner with an expression of theatrical confusion, like a man who couldn't figure out why he was being misunderstood. I'm not doing anything. I'm sitting here drinking coffee. Is that against the law? Last I checked? Last you checked, Lena said, and her voice dropped to something that was almost entirely flat, a voice completely bled of feeling. There's a piece of paper that says you're not supposed to be within 500 feet of where I work. Yeah, he nodded slowly. Yeah, I know about that. He looked at his coffee. I think that's an overreaction, personally, but I'm going to ask you one more time, Lena said. He looked up at her. The friendly expression didn't disappear. It just became something else underneath, something that wasn't friendly at all. Lena, don't do this in public, okay? You're being Get out, she said. The diner had gone quiet. Not conspicuously. The background noise of the kitchen, the distant radio, but the human noise had dropped, the way it drops when people go very still and try to take up less space. Tyler Vaughn pushed the coffee mug 3 inches across the counter. A deliberate, controlled movement. He stood up. He straightened his flannel. He put some money down beside the mug. Far too much for a cup of coffee, which was its own kind of statement. He looked at Lena for a moment with an expression that Avery would later describe to her father as the look of a man who was making a mental note. See you around, he said. He walked out. The bell rang. His truck, a new model black pickup, clean as a whistle, pulled out of the lot and turned north. The diner let out a breath. Lena picked up the money and put it in the register. She picked up the mug. She turned toward the kitchen and for just a moment, not long, 2 seconds maybe, she stopped moving and stood there with her back to the room and her hand on the counter. Then she went back to work. Grant Mercer caught his daughter's eye across the table. Eat your sandwich, he said quietly. Avery looked at him. Just eat, he said. We're not leaving yet. She picked up the sandwich. They stayed another 45 minutes. Dex ordered pie. One of the other riders, a quiet man named Ford, who had worked 20 years as a paramedic before he'd hurt his back and retired, ordered a second cup of coffee and positioned himself near the window with a sightline to the parking lot. Nobody discussed this. Nobody assigned it. It just happened, the way things happen in groups where everyone understands what the situation is without anyone having to say it out loud. Avery waited until the diner was down to just a few customers, the retired men with their checkers, one couple lingering over dessert, before she went to the counter and sat down on one of the stools near the register. Lena looked at her with the polite, armored expression she'd been wearing all afternoon. More coffee? She said. No, thank you. Avery put both hands flat on the counter. I just want to say something, and I'm going to say it once, and then I'm going to go, okay? Lena waited. I saw your arm, Avery said, the way you've been holding it, and I saw that man. She paused. I'm not a cop. I'm not going to call anyone. I'm not going to make anything harder for you. She stopped, started again. I know what it looks like when someone's been hurt and is trying not to show it. And I know what it looks like when someone's afraid of somebody. And you've been both of those things this whole afternoon. Lena's face had gone very still. My name is Avery, she said. My dad is the man in the corner booth who looks like he eats railroad ties for breakfast. A ghost of something crossed Lena's face. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. We're going to be in this area for a few days. And if you ever need someone to talk to, or need someone to just be in the room, or need anything at all, she pushed a card across the counter. Just her name and a cell number, handwritten, no club affiliation. You don't have to call, but I wanted you to know the option exists. Lena looked at the card. She didn't pick it up right away. She stood there looking at it the way people look at things they want very badly and are not sure they're allowed to want. I'm fine, she said. The words were reflexive, automatic. She knew they were. Avery could see that she knew. Okay, Avery said. She stood up and left a 20 on the counter. Have a good rest of your shift. She walked back to the booth where her father was pulling on his jacket. Well, Grant said. She's not fine, Avery said. Grant zipped his jacket, looked at the door. No, she's not. He was quiet for a moment. The guy had a restraining order on him. She said 500 feet. And he walked right into a diner she works at, in the middle of her shift, and sat down at her counter and smiled at her. Yeah. Grant picked up his helmet. He looked across the diner one last time at Lena Brooks, who was wiping down the counter with methodical care and not looking at anyone. Okay, he said. Not to anyone in particular, just the word, like a decision being made. Okay. They filed out. 8 bikes started up in sequence, loud enough to rattle the windows. As they pulled out of the lot and turned south on Route 9, Avery looked back once through her mirror at the diner sign fading behind them. She thought about the way Lena had stood at the counter with her hand braced against it and her back to the room. The way you stand when you're holding yourself together and you cannot afford, not even for 1 second, to stop. The card was still on the counter when they left. Avery didn't know yet if Lena would pick it up. But she knew, the way she knew most things, the same quiet certainty she'd inherited from a man who read situations the way other people read road signs, that whatever was happening to that woman in the white uniform was not over. It was, if anything, getting worse, and the man in the black truck was going to come back. The card stayed on the counter for 6 hours. Avery knew this because Ford had circled back alone, without being asked, and parked his bike across Route 9 at the gas station with a sightline to the diner's front windows. He sat there for 2 hours drinking gas station coffee from a paper cup and watching through the glass, the way a man watches a situation he doesn't fully understand but recognizes as one that requires witnessing. When his shift ended, because that was how they thought of it, shifts without discussing it, Dex took over in a different vehicle, a dented Ford pickup that belonged to the motel's maintenance yard and drew less attention than a Harley. Neither man reported back to Grant unless something happened. That was the understanding. You watched until there was something worth saying, and until then you kept your mouth shut and your eyes open. At 6:47 that evening, Lena Brooks picked up the card. Dex saw her do it through the diner window. She didn't look at it right away. She slipped it into the pocket of her apron like something contraband, something she wasn't supposed to have, and then went back to clearing the counter as if nothing had happened. Dex sent one text to Grant. She kept it. Grant read the text, set his phone face down on the motel room table, and went back to the road atlas he'd been studying for no particular reason. Old habit. When he couldn't sleep, he read maps. He didn't sleep much that night. The call came at 11:14 the next morning. Avery was in the motel parking lot running a socket wrench along the underside of her Sportster when her phone buzzed on the asphalt beside her. Unknown number. She picked it up on the 3rd ring. It's Lena, the voice said. The waitress. From Millie's. Avery sat up carefully, keeping her voice level. Hey. A pause. The sound of wind on the other end, like the woman was outside somewhere, away from walls. I'm not sure why I'm calling, Lena said. I told myself I wasn't going to. That's okay. I don't want anyone to do anything. The words came out practiced, preloaded, like she'd been rehearsing them on the walk to wherever she'd called from. You said you wanted to talk, and I haven't talked to anybody in a really long time, and I thought maybe... She stopped. I'm sorry, this is stupid. It's not stupid, Avery said. She picked up a rag and started wiping her hands, slow and deliberate, giving herself something to do so her voice could stay quiet. You want to get coffee somewhere? Not Millie's. Somewhere else. Another pause. Longer this time. There's a place on Clement Street, Lena said. The Anchor. It's small. He doesn't go there. Avery noted the way she said he. No name, no explanation needed. Just he. Like there was only one person in the world that word could refer to. 1 o'clock? Avery said. Okay, Lena said, and hung up. Avery sat on the asphalt for a moment with the phone in her greasy hand. She looked across the parking lot to where her father was talking with Robbie and Cash near the ice machine. Grant glanced over at her with the peripheral awareness he'd always had. He could clock a change in her posture from 40 feet, and she gave a small nod. He turned back to his conversation without missing a beat, but she saw his shoulders settle differently. The Anchor was exactly what Lena had said. Small, dark-wooded, 4 tables, a coffee bar along one wall. The kind of place kept alive by regulars who'd been coming for 20 years. An old man near the window was working through a crossword puzzle. A woman about 60 was reading a paperback with a cracked spine. The barista was somewhere in his 40s, heavy-set, with a mustache that belonged in a different decade. Avery got there 10 minutes early and took the table in the back corner with her chair facing the door. She ordered black coffee. She waited. Lena came in 2 minutes past 1, still in her work clothes. A different uniform from yesterday, but the same careful posture, the same buttoned left sleeve. She spotted Avery and crossed the room with her chin slightly down, like someone who had spent a lot of time trying not to be noticed in public spaces. She sat down. She didn't take off her jacket. They looked at each other for a moment without speaking. "You want coffee?" Avery said. "Already had 4 cups at the diner." A pause. "Maybe decaf." Avery flagged the barista. They ordered. They waited. There was the particular quality of silence that lives between two people who need to talk about something hard and are both trying to figure out who goes first. Lena went first. "How long were you watching yesterday, before you came to the counter?" "Since you came out to take our order." Lena absorbed that. "My arm." "You were guarding your left side, like it hurt to extend it." Lena looked down at the table. She turned her coffee cup in both hands. Then, with the slow deliberateness of someone making a decision they've put off making for a long time, she pushed her left sleeve up to the elbow. The bruising ran from her wrist to the middle of her forearm in a pattern that Avery recognized. Not a fall, not a doorframe. A grip. The specific shape of fingers applied with significant force. Avery looked at it. She didn't react. She'd learned from her father that the worst thing you could do in a moment like this was make someone feel like what was happening to them was shocking, because the moment they saw your shock, they started managing your feelings instead of talking about their own. "When?" she said. 4 days ago. He got past the lock on my building." Lena pulled her sleeve back down. "He didn't stay long. He never does when he's making a point. He wanted me to know he could." "Did you report it?" The small, exhausted sound Lena made wasn't quite a laugh. "I've reported it 4 times in 8 months. I've got photographs, I've got voice memos, I've got 2 witnesses from my building who've submitted written statements. The last detective I spoke to, nice guy, seemed like he meant it, told me that without him caught in the act, or without more documentation of the violations, there wasn't enough to add charges. The restraining order is already there. It's just..." She pressed her lips together. "Paper. He violated it yesterday at the diner. I know he did, and I can file a report for that. And maybe something happens, maybe it doesn't, and in the meantime he still knows where I work and what shift I'm on and what parking lot I walk to at 9:45 every night to get to my car." Avery was quiet for a moment. "How long were you married?" 3 years, together for 2 before that." Lena turned her cup again. It didn't start like that. It started normal. It started so normal that for a long time, after it changed, I kept thinking I was misremembering the beginning. Like maybe the beginning was a lie too." She shook her head. "He's very good at seeming like a reasonable person, to everyone outside. His family thinks I manufactured the whole thing. His mother told my mother that I had emotional problems." The word landed with the flat weight of something said too many times. "I have a job. I have an apartment. I've rebuilt everything twice. But to them, I'm the unstable one." "And the police," Avery said. "Some of them have been good. Some of them..." "I had one officer tell me that Tyler seemed like a stand-up guy, and maybe I should think about whether I was provoking the situation." She said it without heat, which was somehow worse than if she'd said it with heat. She'd simply run out of outrage for that particular memory. "So, that's where I am." Avery turned her coffee cup. Outside, a truck rolled past on Clement Street, and for just a second, Lena's eyes went to the window, quick and sharp, and then came back. "You thought that was his truck," Avery said. "Black pickup. His is black." She exhaled. "I do that everywhere. Every parking lot, every window. I've been doing it for 8 months. She looked at Avery directly for the first time since sitting down. "Why are you and the men with you? Why do you care about this? You don't know me." It was a fair question. Avery thought about how to answer it honestly without making it about herself. "My dad built something," she said finally, "out of people who didn't have anywhere else to go. Veterans who came back wrong. Men who lost everything and had nothing left but a bike and a reason to stay moving. What they turned into was, it's complicated from the outside. I know how it looks, I know what people think when they see the cuts and the bikes and the whole thing. But the one thing that never changed, no matter what else did, is that they don't walk away from people who are being hurt. She paused. That's not a code they recite. It's just what they do. Lena looked at her for a long time. He'll escalate, she said. If he thinks someone else is involved, he always escalates. I know. I'm serious. She stopped, started again. The last time I had someone try to help me, a friend, a woman from work, she let me stay with her for 2 weeks after I left him. He found out and he showed up at her job, 3 times, until she asked me to leave because she was scared for her kids. Lena's voice didn't crack. It just got quieter. I can't be responsible for something happening to someone else. Lena. Avery waited until the woman looked at her. He violated a restraining order in a room full of witnesses yesterday. And the day before he did that, he got into your building and put his hands on your arm hard enough to bruise you to the bone. She kept her voice even. Whatever your friend was afraid of, she was right to protect her kids. But the Ironback Riders are not a woman living alone with 2 children, okay? Lena sat with that. What does helping look like, she said, specifically. Eyes on you, documentation when he violates the order again, because he will, and we'll be positioned to record it, building a file that law enforcement can't dismiss. Avery paused. And if he comes near you again, a conversation. What kind of conversation? The kind that makes clear there are consequences. Lena looked at her hands. I don't want anyone to hurt him, she said, quietly. Not with any particular feeling about Tyler Vaughn's well-being, Avery sensed, but with the exhausted practicality of someone who had thought through scenarios. If anyone hurts him, it becomes about that, not about what he did. And he has a lawyer, and his family has money, and I've seen how fast the story flips. We don't hurt people, Avery said. She said it simply, without defensiveness. Not our method. Another silence. Lena picked up her decaf and drank half of it and set it back down. Okay, she said. Grant heard the summary without interrupting. Avery sat across from him in the motel room, 2 chairs pulled to face each other, the door open to the cold afternoon air because Grant always kept a door or window open if he could, a habit left over from years of being in spaces he needed to be able to leave quickly. He'd been a different kind of man when that habit formed. He was a different kind of man now. But some things you don't unlearn. She told him about the arm, the 4 police reports, the detective, Tyler's family, the friend who'd been driven out of her own job. She told him about the pattern, not chaos, not rage out of control, but something calculated, managed, applied in the specific doses of a man who understood exactly how much pressure he could exert without crossing the threshold that made intervention unavoidable. Grant listened. He picked at the edge of a callus on his right palm, a thing he did when he was thinking hard. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Ford, he said. Ford was sitting at the small table near the window, a cup of cold coffee beside him, his big hands folded on the tabletop. Yeah. You work trauma. What's the read on escalation? Ford thought about it with the particular weight of a man whose professional history included pulling people out of wreckage. Controlled abuser who's been operating without consequences for 8 months and just had a public audience for a restraining order violation. He paused. He'll test the boundary again soon. In the next few days. Either he escalates because he feels exposed, or he goes quiet for a week and then escalates when she lowers her guard. Either way, the vector is the same. Timeline? Week, maybe less. Grant nodded. He stood up and went to the window. Outside, Cash and Robbie were playing cards on the tailgate of Dex's pickup, and the afternoon light was going gray and flat, the kind of flat light that precedes a weather system. Here's the thing, said a voice from the doorway. They all looked. It was Mac. Mac was the oldest Ironback member still riding, 58, full gray beard, with a right knee held together by surgical hardware and a personality that was essentially a well-maintained wall. He'd been with Grant's father before Grant. He'd seen things go wrong in ways that left marks on everyone who'd been present for them. He came in and sat on the edge of the bed, forearms on his knees. Say we do this, he said. We plant eyes on this woman. We document. We build a file. And Tyler Vaughn gets a visit, or a look, or whatever, and he clocks what it means. He was looking at Grant, not Avery. We're not local here. We ride out in a week. What happens after we're gone? We won't just ride out, Grant said. You say that now. Mac. I'm not arguing. His voice was flat, not hostile. I'm asking what the plan looks like past next Thursday. Because I've seen you do this before, Grant. 3, 4 times. And twice it turned out right, and once it got complicated, and once... He stopped. Let the silence fill in whatever word he'd decided not to say. The room had a texture now that hadn't been there 10 seconds ago. Avery looked at her father. Grant's back was to the room. He was still looking out the window. The set of his shoulders had changed. Which time are you talking about? Grant said. You know which time. A silence that had weight. That was different, Grant said. It always is, until it isn't. Mac unfolded himself and stood up. He wasn't angry. I was something more difficult than angry. He was the voice of a specific experience that the room didn't want to acknowledge. I'm not saying walk away. I'm saying we need a plan that doesn't evaporate when we leave. Because the last time we left a situation like this without a plan, a woman ended up... Mac. Grant's voice was very quiet. Mac stopped. He looked at Grant's back for a long moment. All right, he said, and walked out. Avery waited until his footsteps cleared the doorway before she said, What happened the last time? Grant didn't answer immediately. The sound of Card and Robbie at the tailgate came through the window. The slap of cards, a low laugh. 7 years ago, Grant said finally. Woman in Castor County. Her ex had a history like Tyler Vaughn's. We got involved. Ran surveillance, built documentation, had him served and charged. He turned from the window. His face was the face he wore when he was being completely, unguardedly honest with her, which happened rarely enough that she always knew it when she saw it. We left after the charges were filed, before the trial. We had something at home we had to get back to. We thought it was handled. Avery already didn't like where this was going. He made bail, Grant said. Went to her apartment the night after the arraignment. She survived. Barely. The room held that. So Mac's right, Avery said. Mac's always right. That's what makes him hard to be around. He sat down in the chair she'd vacated. He looked old for a moment. Not infirm, nothing like that, but old in the sense of carrying a specific weight for a long time. We finished this one, all the way through, not just until the papers are filed. The club's going to have opinions about that. The club has opinions about everything. That's what the club's for. He looked at her steadily. Are you in? Obviously. Then let's figure out the shape of it, Sut. The shape of it became clear over the next 36 hours, and it was not simple. Dex took the first overnight watch position on Lena's street, a 2-block radius from her apartment building on Garfield, where she lived on the 3rd floor of a walk-up that had a security door with a broken intercom and a parking lot that was lit by exactly one working sodium light. The apartment wasn't secure. It was the kind of place you rent when you're rebuilding, when your priority is cheap and close to work, when you don't have the bandwidth to negotiate better. Dex noted all of this in a voice memo he sent back to Grant at 2 in the morning, his voice low in the cab of the borrowed pickup. Ford started driving Lena to and from her shifts, using the pickup so it read as civilian. He was quiet, good at the specific kind of silence that doesn't demand anything, the silence of someone who is accustomed to sitting with people in difficult circumstances. By the second ride, Lena had started talking, not about Tyler specifically, about work, about the regular customers she liked, about a cat she was thinking of getting if her landlord ever answered any of her questions about the pet policy. Normal things. Ford listened and occasionally said something back, and Avery, when Ford reported these conversations, recognized what was happening. Lena was remembering what it felt like to be an ordinary person with ordinary thoughts, and she was doing it slowly, like someone stretching a muscle that hadn't been used in a long time. Tyler Vaughn appeared on day 2. He didn't come to the diner this time. He sat in his truck across from Lena's building at 10:50 in the evening, engine off, lights off, for 43 minutes. Dex clocked the arrival, got plates, and filmed it on his phone. Timestamp, duration, distance from the building. When Tyler drove away, Dex followed at a gap of 5 vehicles for 8 blocks until it was clear Tyler was heading out of the neighborhood and then turned back. The footage was clean. Clear license plate, clear make and model, clearly positioned to observe Lena's building. Grant sent it to a contact he had, a retired detective named Whitmore, who now consulted for a private firm and owed Grant a favor of the kind that doesn't get itemized. Whitmore confirmed what they already knew. The footage alone wasn't an arrest, but it was documentation, another brick. He knows she has help, Avery said that night. She was sitting on the motel room floor with her back against the bed, eating gas station crackers and going through the footage frame by frame on her phone. He drove away the second Dex moved. He was watching the street, not just her window. He's smart, Grant said. Smart and patient. He's not going to do something stupid in front of cameras. He's going to wait until there's a gap. Then we don't give him a gap. We can't cover every hour of we cover enough. Grant was quiet for a moment. What does she have? Family, friends? Anyone local? A woman named Dina from the diner. Older. They seem close. Avery set the phone down. And her mother. But her mother lives 4 hours out and apparently sides with Tyler's family on most of this. Grant's mouth pressed flat. Her own mother. Tyler's very charming, apparently, to people who only see the surface. A pause, then, carefully, how's she doing? Actually, Avery thought about it honestly. She's holding, she's functioning. But every time a black truck goes by, she goes somewhere else for a second. She turned the phone over in her hands. She's been managing this alone for 8 months. She's exhausted in the way that's not about sleep. Grant nodded. He knew something about that particular exhaustion. He didn't say so. Outside the motel, the temperature had dropped into the low 40s, and the wind was coming sideways off the highway. Cash had started someone's bike earlier for reasons that hadn't been explained, and the sound of it had run for 20 minutes and then stopped. Someone was smoking near the ice machine. The smell came through the door crack, sharp and familiar. Mac's not wrong to be worried, Avery said. I know he's not. The club's getting restless. Robbie asked Cash this afternoon when we were moving on. Cash didn't answer him, but Robbie's going to ask again. Robbie can ask all he wants. Dad. She looked at him. You can't just... I know I can't just, he said. The edge in his voice was not directed at her. It was the edge of a man who was trying to hold too many things at once and felt the strain of it. I know. I'm going to talk to them. When? He stood up and put on his jacket. Now's as good a time as any. He gathered them in the motel parking lot at midnight, which was not unusual. The Ironback riders had always done their real talking in parking lots, in the cold, under insufficient light. Something about the open air, the lack of walls, the ability to see in all directions. There were 7 of them: Mac, Dex, Ford, Cash, Robbie, a quiet man named Serrano who was only on his second club ride but had spent 6 years as a K-9 officer before a dog bite and a bad infection had ended that career, and a man everyone called Boots whose real name nobody used and whose particular skill set included, among other things, an almost supernatural ability to go unnoticed. They stood in the lot with their breath coming in small clouds. Someone leaned against a bike. Someone else had their hands in their jacket pockets. Nobody sat down. You stood for this kind of conversation. Grant stood in the middle and didn't preamble it. The situation with the woman, I need it on the table. How long are we here? Robbie said. He said it without hostility, direct and practical. He was 29, the youngest member, and he had a daughter of his own at home in Kenwick, and he'd been checking his phone more than usual the last 2 days. Until it's done, Grant said. Robbie nodded. Not agreement, not argument, just acknowledgement. Define done, Max said. The harassment stops. She's safe. Whatever mechanism makes that real, legal, documented, or otherwise, is in place. Grant looked around the group. I'm not asking you to like it. I'm telling you what it is. She wants to use the system, Dex said. Not critically, just stating it. She's afraid of escalation. She's right to be. Systems failed her 4 times, Ford said. Which is why we're building what the system's been missing. Grant's voice was level. We give them something they can't dismiss. We do it clean, no contact outside of what's documented, and we stay the course. A silence settled over the group, cold and weighted. Then Max said, and if Tyler Vaughn decides to move before the documentation is enough? Grant looked at him. Then we make a different decision. What decision? The one that needs to be made. He held Max's gaze. You know I'm not going to stand in a parking lot and let her get hurt because we were worried about the paperwork. Something moved across Max's face. Not agreement exactly. Recognition. The understanding of a man who had been with Grant through enough situations to know that this particular line in Grant Mercer's universe was not negotiable. He nodded once. Grant looked around the group. Anyone leaving? Nobody moved. Boots, who hadn't said a word, just put his hands deeper in his pockets and turned his face back toward the highway. All right, Grant said. Dex and Serrano on overnight. Ford takes the morning transport. I need someone on Tyler's home address by 6 a.m. I'll do it, Cash said. Don't approach. Don't let him clock you. He won't. They broke up. Not with ceremony, not with anything said. 8 men dispersing back to rooms, to bikes, to the particular quiet of people who were decided. Avery, who had watched from the doorway of her room, walked back inside and lay down on the motel bed without taking off her jacket. She was almost asleep when her phone buzzed. A text from a number she'd saved under Lena's name. He was outside my building tonight. I saw him from my window. He didn't do anything, just sat there. She stared at the message for a long moment. We know, she typed back. We had eyes on him. You're okay. A long pause. Then, I counted. He sat there for 43 minutes. We counted too. It's documented. Another pause. Then, in a message that came through alone, no preamble, no context. I need to tell you something about why the police didn't believe me the first 2 times. Avery sat up, her jacket crinkled in the quiet room. Tell me, she sent back. Not over text, Lena replied. Tomorrow morning, before my shift. Can you come? Yes, Avery wrote. I'll be there. She set the phone on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling. The motel's heating unit kicked on and ran for a while and then stopped. Outside, one of the bikes started, Dex probably, heading out for his overnight position, and the sound of the engine was loud and then receding and then gone, swallowed up by distance and cold air. Something Lena had written lodged in Avery's mind and would not move. Why the police didn't believe me the first 2 times. Not the last time, not the most recent time, the first 2 times, which meant there was something at the beginning, something in the early days of Lena's attempts to get help, that had derailed not just 1 report but 2, in a way that had apparently given Tyler Vaughn room to operate with impunity for months afterward. Something Tyler knew about. Something, Avery suspected, that Tyler had put there. She turned off the light. She lay in the dark and listened to the wind move against the window. Whatever Lena was going to tell her in the morning, Avery already knew it was going to change the shape of everything they thought they understood about this situation. Lena was already outside when Avery pulled up. She was standing on the front steps of her building in a gray zip-up hoodie with her arms crossed over her chest and her breath coming in small white bursts in the morning cold. 6:47 a.m. The street was mostly empty. A sanitation truck grinding through its route 2 blocks east, a dog walker moving fast against the wind. The sodium light in the parking lot behind the building had finally burned out overnight, and the lot sat in flat gray shadow. Avery killed the engine and got off the bike and stood on the sidewalk looking at Lena. She didn't say good morning. Something in Lena's posture made pleasantries feel wrong. You want to go inside? Avery said. No. Lena looked up and down the street. Old habit, automatic. I'd rather be outside. Avery nodded. She pulled her jacket tighter and waited. Lena uncrossed her arms, put her hands in her hoodie pocket, looked at the ground for a moment, then up, then at Avery directly, with the specific expression of someone who has made a decision and is committed to it even though it costs something. The first time I called the police, she said, was 4 months into the marriage. He'd broken 2 of my fingers. She said it without drama, the way people say things they've rehearsed saying until the horror of them goes flat. I didn't go to the hospital. I taped them myself. And then 3 days later, I called the non-emergency line and said I needed to report a domestic incident. Avery kept her face quiet, listening. The officer who came was named Paulson. He was maybe 35. He sat in the kitchen and he asked me to walk him through what happened, and I did. And then he said he needed to take a statement from Tyler too, because that was procedure. And Tyler came in from the other room and sat down and she paused, not for effect, because the memory required a moment. Tyler told him that I'd been struggling with addiction for 2 years. That I'd been in and out of a voluntary program, that I sometimes got confused about timelines, especially when I hadn't slept well, or when I was, he said it exactly like this, managing poorly. She looked at a fixed point past Avery's shoulder. And then he showed Officer Paulson his phone. Text messages. From my number to his number, saying things I never said. Avery went very still. He'd had my phone, Lena said. I didn't know for how long. He had it long enough to draft messages and send them from my number to a secondary phone he kept, and then delete them from my outbox. She finally looked directly at Avery. He built a record. Before I ever thought about leaving, he built a record of me being unstable, threatening him, making things up. He started that. I don't know when he started it. At least a year before I called Paulson. Maybe longer. Avery heard her own breath in the cold air. The second time I called, Lena said, was 3 weeks after the first. Different officer. Tyler had already contacted the department. I found this out later, 8 months later, from a woman at the victim's advocacy office. He'd already contacted the department and spoken to a supervisor and expressed concern about his wife's mental state. Brought printed copies of the text messages. Brought a letter from a doctor, his family doctor, a man who had known Tyler since Tyler was 12 years old, expressing concern about my stability. She swallowed. So when the second officer came, she already had a picture of who she was walking in to see. And I didn't know that. I was trying to do everything right. I was trying to be calm and clear and organized. And the whole time she was looking at me the way you look at someone you've already made up your mind about. The sanitation truck turned the corner at the end of the block, and the grinding sound peaked and faded. He planned it, Avery said, not a question. From the beginning. Lena's voice was steady in the specific way of a person who has had a long time to accept something that should not have to be accepted. He picked me knowing I didn't have family close by. He isolated me from the friends I had before. Slowly, over 2 years, in ways that seemed like normal couple stuff until they weren't. He built the paper trail before I had any reason to know I needed one. And when I finally tried to get help, he already had the story written. She looked at the ground. That's what I needed you to know. Before you spend any more time on this, because whatever you're doing, whatever you think you're building, he's probably already thought about it. Avery stood with that for a moment. The cold was coming up through the soles of her boots. The text messages, she said. Do you have documentation that they were fabricated? I have an affidavit from a digital forensics analyst, a private one, that I paid for myself over 6 months of saving. It shows the metadata inconsistencies. The messages were drafted on a different device than mine. But Tyler's lawyer filed a counter-affidavit from their own analyst saying the findings were inconclusive. She made the small, airless sound again that wasn't a laugh. His family has money. I have a diner salary. Who's Tyler's family? His father is Dennis Vaughn. He owns Vaughn Aggregate Supply. Concrete and gravel, contracts with the county and 2 neighboring counties. They've been in this area for 40 years. She looked at Avery. He does not like losing. Tyler comes from a man who does not like losing. The weight of that settled over the street. Does his father know what Tyler is? Avery said. Lena thought about it, really thought. I think Dennis Vaughn has a very specific story about who Tyler is, and he's invested a lot of money and effort in making sure that story holds. Whether he knows the truth underneath it. She stopped. I used to think no, now I don't know. Avery pulled out her phone. I need to make a call. Avery? Lena's hand came out and stopped just short of touching her arm. If you go after Dennis Vaughn, I'm not going after anyone. She held Lena's gaze. I'm calling someone who can find out what Tyler's been building in the last week. Because if he planned what he did before you left, he's planning something now. She paused. You've been ahead of him in your own mind. But we need to figure out if he's also been ahead of us. Lena held her gaze for another moment. Then she nodded and stepped back. Avery walked to the end of the block and made the call. Whitmore picked up on the second ring, which meant he was already at his desk, which meant it was already a bad morning for someone somewhere. Tell me about Dennis Vaughn, Avery said without preamble. Vaughn Aggregate Supply. What's his reach look like, county-wise? A pause. The sound of Whitmore pulling something up. Vaughn, yeah, 3 county road contracts, 2 state infrastructure bids pending. Donates to the Sheriff's Department's equipment fund every year. Got a plaque in the lobby of the county building. Another pause. You're in this guy's territory? His son is Tyler Vaughn. I need to know if Tyler has made any calls or inquiries in the last 72 hours. Anything touching legal, law enforcement, private security. That's a broad ask on short notice. I know. What am I looking for specifically? Whether Tyler Vaughn knows he's being watched, and whether he's made a move to counter it. Whitmore was quiet for a moment, the sound of a chair shifting. Give me 4 hours. I've got 2. Give me 3. Done, Avery said, and hung up. She turned around. Lena was still on the steps, watching her. Go to work, Avery said. Ford's going to drive you, same as yesterday. I have a shift at 8. Ford will be here at 7:30. She walked back toward her bike. Don't vary your routine, everything normal. Avery? She stopped. What do you think he's done? Lena said. Avery looked at her. She thought about what to say. She thought about the architecture of what Lena had just described, the patience of it, the planning, the way Tyler Vaughn had spent years laying groundwork, the way a man lays pipe before the foundation goes in, invisible and load-bearing. She thought about a man who had thought to fabricate text messages from his wife's phone before she'd even started thinking about leaving. I think he's been doing something while we've been watching him, she said. I just don't know what yet. She got back to the motel at 7:20 and found Grant already up, standing in the parking lot with a cup of coffee, talking with Mac in the low, unhurried register they used for conversations that were serious but not yet urgent. They both looked up when she pulled in. She told them everything. Standing in the parking lot with the cold coming down harder now, the sky the color of old iron, the first suggestion of rain in the air. When she finished, Grant didn't say anything for a moment. He turned his coffee cup in both hands, not one, which was a tell she'd learned to read years ago. He did it when he was recalibrating, when something had just rearranged the board. He built a false record of instability, Mac said. Not a question, confirming the architecture of it. Fabricated text, doctor's letter, early contact with law enforcement, before she had any reason to protect herself. Mac was quiet. He looked at Grant. Something passed between them that Avery couldn't fully read, but it had the texture of recognition, like two men who had seen the shape of something like this before. Tell her, Grant said. Mac looked at the ground. He picked up a pebble and turned it between his fingers for a moment, and then set it down with the precision of someone buying time they don't actually need. Cash ran Tyler's address this morning, Mac said. 6 a.m. like Grant asked. He's got a home address on Delwood. Nice house, detached garage, privacy fence. Cash got there and set up down the block. He paused. At 6:40, a car came out of the garage. Not Tyler's truck. A dark blue sedan, no plates visible. Cash followed it for 3 blocks until it pulled into a parking structure on Meridian. And man who got out of the car and walked into the building at 6:52 a.m. was not Tyler Vaughn. Mac looked at her. It was Dennis Vaughn, Tyler's father. The parking lot held that for a second. What building on Meridian? Avery said. County Annex B, Mac said. Houses 3 departments, Public Works, Planning Commission. He paused. And the district attorney's office. The rain started. Small drops at first, barely there, then more insistent. Avery looked at her father. Dennis Vaughn is meeting with the DA's office at 6:50 in the morning. Grant's expression hadn't changed. Could be anything. At 6:50 in the morning, before the office opens. She felt the cold of the rain on the back of her neck. Tyler's being watched by a motorcycle club, and his father is in a meeting with the DA before business hours. We don't know what the meeting is. Dad. He held up a hand, not dismissively, a gesture of, I know what this looks like. Let me think. Mac turned the pebble in his fingers again. Set it down. There's one more thing. Avery waited. Boots followed up on the private security angle. Tyler made 2 calls yesterday afternoon from a number registered to a Shell LLC. 1 call to a firm in Harwick, private investigations. 1 call to an individual named Soto, Marcus Soto, former county sheriff's deputy, left the department under circumstances that weren't made public. Mac looked at her steadily. Boots found one of Soto's old work partners from a PI outfit in Decatur, asked around quietly. Soto's specialty, before and after the department, is the same thing. Which is? Opposition research, specifically in civil and criminal proceedings. He finds things, or makes things findable, that are useful to whoever's paying. The rain came harder. Neither of them moved. Tyler's not building a defense, Avery said slowly. the shape of it assembling in her mind with a coldness she could feel separate from the weather. He's building an offense. He's hiring someone to find dirt on Lena, or fabricate it, to use in whatever proceedings come next. That's what it looks like, Max said. And his father is in the DA's office before the building officially opens. She looked at Grant. This isn't just a man who beats his wife. This is a family with infrastructure. They've done this before. Grant set his coffee down on the hood of the pickup. He looked at the rain. How long has Whitmore got? He said. 90 minutes. Okay. He turned and walked back toward the motel rooms. Get everyone up. Parking lot. 10 minutes. They stood in the rain because there was nowhere under cover big enough for all of them. 8 people, jackets on, water beating on leather, nobody complaining. Grant laid it out without editorializing. The fabricated record, Dennis Vaughn at the DA's office. Marcus Soto. The shape of what Tyler Vaughn appeared to be doing while the Ironback riders had been watching his truck and documenting his drive-bys. The parking lot was quiet except for the rain and the distant sound of the highway. They know about us, Serrano said. He said it with the calm of a former K-9 officer, someone accustomed to assessing threat without the luxury of panic. Tyler clocked us at the diner. He's had 3 days. A man with money and his father's connections has had 3 days to find out who we are. Yes, Grant said. So what does the DA's office have on the Ironback riders that's usable? Nobody answered immediately. Not because nobody had an answer, but because the answer was complicated in the way that most truths about most people's histories are complicated when someone with resources and bad intentions decides to go looking. Grant looked around the group. I'm going to ask this once, and I need straight answers. Anyone here carrying anything that could be used? Outstanding, pending, anything. A silence. The kind of silence that has texture. Robbie said quietly, I've got a deferred sentence from 6 years ago. Possession. I've stayed clean, it's been clean, but it's on record. Grant nodded. Anyone else? Cash looked at the pavement. There's a civil judgment from an altercation in Prentiss County. Other party was the aggressor. My lawyer said it was dead, but it's technically open. Grant processed this without expression. He looked at Ford. Ford was looking at the middle distance. He'd gone somewhere behind his eyes for a second, and when he came back, he said, My license to practice emergency medicine was suspended 8 years ago. I surrendered it before the board could pull it. Opioid diversion. He said it flatly. Not ashamed, not defiant. Just a man stating a fact that he had lived with long enough to carry without drama. I've been clean 11 years, but the record exists. Nobody in the parking lot reacted with surprise. Some of them already knew. Some of them hadn't. It didn't change anything in the air between them. That, Avery thought, was one of the truest things about the club. Not that its members were clean, but that their histories didn't create hierarchy among them. Grant absorbed it all. So, Tyler Vaughn has a private investigator and a contact in the DA's office, and we have 3 members with exploitable records. He let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. Okay. What does okay mean? Robbie said. It means okay. It means I understand the board. Grant looked at him steadily. It doesn't change what we're doing. It might change what they do to us while we're doing it, Robbie said. His voice wasn't cracking, wasn't angry. He was 29 years old with a daughter at home, and he was doing the math on what a reopened deferred sentence could mean for custody arrangements he'd spent 3 years stabilizing. If Dennis Vaughn calls in a favor with the DA's office and someone decides to look hard at our records, then they look, Grant said. Dad, Avery said. Both men looked at her. Robbie's right that we need to account for it. He's not wrong. She looked at Robbie. But if we step back now, Tyler Vaughn wins. And Lena Brooks, who already has an 8-month head start on being destroyed by this man and his family, goes back to being alone. She looked around the circle. I'm not making that call for any of you. You each decide for yourselves what you can carry, but I need you to know what the alternative is. A silence. Rain ticking on leather. Boots, who hadn't spoken yet, said, I'm in. Dex, in. Ford looked at the ground for a second and then, I'm not stepping back. Cash nodded. Serrano nodded. Mac had been looking at Grant throughout all of this. Now he said, get Whitmore on the phone. We need to know what Dennis Vaughn said in that meeting before we make another move. Whitmore called back at 9:47. Avery took it in her motel room with Grant sitting across the table and Max standing in the doorway. Dennis Vaughn, Whitmore said. He sounded like a man who had discovered something and was choosing his words carefully. He met with an ADA named Carver, Patricia Carver. She handles cases involving restraining order violations and harassment. He was there for 40 minutes. A pause. My source says the meeting involved a formal inquiry, not a complaint, not a filing, but an inquiry regarding the activities of a motorcycle club that has allegedly been intimidating a witness in an ongoing domestic matter. The room went very cold. He filed against us, Avery said. Not filed, inquired. There's a distinction, but the inquiry names the Ironback Riders specifically, claims that the club has been surveilling Tyler Vaughn, following him, and using their presence to intimidate him from exercising his legal right to contact his ex-wife. She has a restraining order, Avery said. The inquiry claims Tyler has been attempting to reconcile through appropriate channels and that the club's involvement is harassment designed to prevent a legal reconciliation process. A pause. The inquiry also includes a supplementary statement from a named witness who claims to have seen a member of the Ironback Riders following Tyler's vehicle on a public road. Avery looked at Grant. Dex had followed Tyler's truck 3 nights ago. One tail, 5 vehicles of separation, 8 blocks. Somebody was watching Dex follow Tyler, she said. Whitmore said, I don't know who, but the statement is dated yesterday, so whoever saw it told Dennis Vaughn about it within 24 hours. He paused. Avery, this is moving fast. If Carver decides the inquiry has enough substance to open a formal investigation into the club's activities. She won't, Avery said. She sounded more certain than she felt. She might not. But if Dennis Vaughn escalates to a formal filing, and if the DA's office thinks there's political capital in being seen to crack down on motorcycle club intimidation, which there usually is. He didn't finish that sentence. He didn't need to. What does Carver look like? Is she in Vaughn's pocket? I don't know enough to say that. She might just be doing her job based on a credible-seeming complaint from a credible-seeming man with community standing. Another pause. But I'd be careful about assuming anyone in that office is neutral right now. Avery thanked him and ended the call. She set the phone on the table. She looked at her father. She looked at Mac. Someone in our perimeter is reporting to Dennis Vaughn, she said. The room absorbed that. Not a member, Grant said immediately, flat and certain. No, someone we didn't account for. Someone who's been watching us watch Tyler. She pressed both palms on the table. Tyler drives past Lena's building at 11 p.m. We document it. The next morning, Dennis Vaughn is in the DA's office with a statement about one of our guys following Tyler's vehicle. She looked at Grant. He wanted us to follow him. He sat outside her building long enough for us to clock him and log it, and then he drove away slowly enough for Dex to pick up the tail. And someone in a position to see that tail was already in place and waiting. Mac made a sound in his chest that wasn't words. He used his own drive-by as bait, Avery said. He's not afraid of us documenting him. He was documenting us. The cold of the realization was different from the cold of the rain. It went deeper. Grant stood up. He went to the window and looked at the parking lot, the way he'd looked at windows and parking lots his whole adult life, not for comfort, but for information, counting what he could see and accounting for what he couldn't. He's smarter than we gave him credit for, Grant said. He's been running this play for years, Avery said. He ran it on Lena before she knew she was in a game. He's running it on us the same way. She stood up. And his father is already in front of the DA. So what do we do? Max said. Avery picked up her phone again. She looked at the screen for a second. No new messages from Lena, which meant Lena was still in her shift, still moving through her day, still unaware that the ground had shifted again beneath her. We get ahead of it, she said. We take what we have, everything documented, the metadata affidavit, the drive-by footage, the restraining order violations, and we get it to someone in law enforcement who isn't inside Dennis Vaughn's orbit before the DA's office opens a formal inquiry that buries us. She looked at Grant. We need a detective who will actually read it, one who hasn't already been touched by this family. Whitmore knows people, Grant said. Whitmore's already at his limit. We need someone local who isn't connected to the county. She turned to Mac. State level. Is there anything? Mac thought. He was quiet for a long moment. The serious quiet of a man running through a mental catalog. There's a state police investigator, woman named Garza, assigned to the Domestic Violence Task Force. She ran a training I attended in 2019. She wasn't like most of them. She was actually angry about the right things. He paused. I don't know if she's still in the position. Find out, Avery said. Mac pulled out his phone and left the room. Grant stayed at the window. There's one more thing, Avery said. He looked at her. If Tyler has someone watching our perimeter, they know our faces. They know the bikes. They know how many of us there are. She kept her voice level. And if the DA opens a formal inquiry, any visible surveillance we run from this point forward becomes evidence against us, not against Tyler. I know, Grant said, which means we can't protect Lena the way we've been protecting her. I know, which means she's exposed. I know, Avery. He said it quietly, not with frustration. Just the weight of a man who had already run to the end of every path and was standing at the edge of a thing he didn't have a clean answer for. I know. The rain had stopped. The parking lot sat in that flat, colorless stillness that follows rain, everything wet and still, and somehow quieter than before it started. One of the bikes had a small run of water coming off its mirror, dropping steadily onto the asphalt. Avery's phone buzzed. She looked at it. A text from Lena's number, sent from the diner, which meant Lena had borrowed someone's phone or stepped out with her own. He came in again. Different table this time. He just sat down and ordered food and looked at me the whole shift. He tipped $30. When he left, he said, "Have a good day," loud enough for the whole counter to hear. He didn't threaten anything. He was polite. He smiled at the other customers. A second message, sent 3 minutes after the first. He brought someone with him, older man, sat across from him. They talked the whole meal, and the older man kept looking at me too. I don't know who he was. Then a third message, the one that changed everything. I think I recognized him from somewhere, but I couldn't figure out from where. And then on my break I remembered. He was in a photograph Tyler kept in his office. Tyler told me it was his father's oldest friend. I didn't know his name, but he was wearing a county badge on his jacket, an official one. Avery read the messages, read them again. She walked to the door. Dad, she said. Grant turned from the window. Tyler just had lunch at Lena's diner with a man wearing a county official's badge, she said, in front of her, in public, while a formal inquiry against us is sitting on Patricia Carver's desk. She watched Grant's face process this, not with anger, not with fear, but with the particular expression of a man who has just understood, completely and without further doubt, that what he is dealing with is not a violent husband and a bad situation. It is a machine. Built over years, running on money and relationships and the specific kind of impunity that comes from never once being held accountable for anything. And it had just turned, fully and deliberately, to look directly at them. Call Garza, Grant said. Now. Whatever Mac finds, we move tonight. Mac found Garza in 40 minutes. She was still with the State Police Domestic Violence Task Force, still based out of the regional office in Kellerton, 42 miles north. Mac had her direct line from the 2019 training, and he called it standing in the motel parking lot with the wet asphalt steaming faintly in the cold and his voice low and deliberate. She picked up on the fourth ring. Garza. My name is Mac Dillon. You won't remember me. I attended a task force training you ran in Kellerton 4 years ago. I'm with a motorcycle club called the Ironback Riders, and I need 20 minutes of your time today because a woman in your jurisdiction is in serious danger, and the county apparatus that should be protecting her has been compromised by her abuser's family. A silence on the other end. The specific silence of someone deciding whether they're being played. Dennis Vaughn. Vaughn Aggregate. His son Tyler has an active restraining order filed by his ex-wife, Lena Brooks. Tyler has violated that order multiple times in the past 10 days with documentation. This morning, Dennis Vaughn was in a private meeting with ADA Patricia Carver before business hours. This afternoon, Tyler sat in Lena's workplace with a man wearing a county official's badge in front of Lena while that inquiry was sitting on Carver's desk. Mac paused. I have footage, timestamps, metadata analysis of fabricated communications, and 4 prior police reports that were contaminated by Tyler's pre-built false record. Another silence. Longer. Where are you right now? Garza said. Kellerton Motor Inn, Route 9. I can be there at 2 o'clock. We need earlier. I can be there at 2 o'clock, she said again. Not inflexible, just precise. A woman who did not scramble on someone else's timeline until she understood what she was scrambling for. 2 o'clock, Max said. Thank you. He came back into the motel room and looked at Grant. 2 p.m. Grant looked at his watch. 4 hours and change. He nodded. Then we used the 4 hours. What they did with the 4 hours was build the case in the only way that mattered, not the way they wished they'd built it, not the way it should have been built if Tyler Vaughn were an ordinary man without a father with county contracts and an early morning relationship with the DA's office. They built it the way you build something when you know it's going to be scrutinized by people looking for reasons to dismiss it. Avery sat at the motel room table with Ford's laptop and organized everything into a sequence a prosecutor could follow without needing context. The footage of Tyler outside Lena's building, time-stamped, GPS tagged, plate number visible. The diner incident from day one. The metadata affidavit from Lena's private forensics analyst. The 4 prior police reports with the documented inconsistencies in how they were handled. Ford's voice memos from the overnight watches, each one time-stamped and cross-referenced with Tyler's known movements. She worked fast. Not panicked, fast in the clean, focused way she worked on engines, each piece finding its place in the sequence, each gap noted and addressed or flagged as needing address. Cash drove to Lena's diner and parked across the street and watched Tyler's truck, which was still in the lot. He sent an update every 20 minutes, nothing moving. Tyler had ordered food, stayed 90 minutes, left with the badge man in the older man's vehicle at 12:15. The truck remained in the lot, which meant Tyler was either coming back for it or had left it deliberately. And a man as deliberate as Tyler Vaughn did not leave his truck somewhere by accident. Serrano drove the route between the diner and Lena's apartment building twice, noting sight lines, noting the dead sodium light in the parking lot, noting the gap in coverage between the rear of Lena's building and the alley that ran parallel to Garfield Street. He sent a voice memo to Grant. 3 sentences. No editorializing. Boots did what Boots did, which was go somewhere nobody noticed him going and come back with information. In this case, he was gone for an hour and 40 minutes and came back with the name of the man who had been in the diner with Tyler and Dennis Vaughn's identified friend, Raymond Coyle, County Commissioner for District 3, appointed 18 months ago, whose appointment had been supported publicly and enthusiastically by Dennis Vaughn's Business Association. County Commissioner, Grant said when Boots put the name on the table. Oversees municipal contracts, Boots said, including the county road contracts Vaughn aggregate holds. The table was quiet. Tyler didn't bring a badge to intimidate Lena, Avery said slowly, not looking up from the laptop. He brought a county commissioner to be seen in that diner, to be seen with Lena, so that when this gets to any proceeding, civil or criminal, Tyler can put Raymond Coyle on the stand and have him say he was there. He observed Lena. She seemed calm. She didn't appear distressed. She was perfectly professional and friendly. Mac exhaled through his nose. A character witness who happened to be there coincidentally. A character witness with a county badge who can tell a courtroom or a DA what he personally observed. She looked up. Tyler's not just threatening her. He's building his defense for whatever comes next. He needs people who can testify to her stability or her lack of it. And he's manufacturing the circumstances to make those observations. He's doing to the court what he did to the police reports, Grant said. Yes. She closed the laptop. He's been doing this his whole life. Tyler Vaughn has never been held accountable for anything, because by the time any accountability mechanism gets close to him, he's already filled the air with enough doubt and counter-narrative that the mechanism chokes. She looked at her father. Garza needs to understand that before she reads a single page of what we've built, she said. Because if she walks in thinking this is a simple domestic situation with a complicated paper trail, she'll be operating in the wrong frame and Tyler's lawyers will have her turned around before the first hearing. Grant looked at her. You talked to Garza. I was planning to. No. I mean, you take point. Not me. He said it without hesitation. You understand the structure of it better than I do. And, he paused. A woman walking Garza through what another woman built and documented is a different conversation than me doing it. She held his gaze for a second. She nodded. Garza arrived at 1:53, which meant she'd left earlier than she'd said, which meant she'd made some calls of her own after Max, and had decided the situation warranted moving faster than her original posture had suggested. She was around 50, compact and dark-haired, in plain clothes, gray slacks, a navy jacket, boots with a low heel that were sensible but not apologetic. She drove an unmarked state vehicle, and she parked it in the motel lot without hesitation and walked to the room number Mac had texted her without looking around for reassurance. She shook hands with Grant. She looked at the room, the laptop, the papers, the people arranged around it, and she said, "Show me." Avery showed her. It took 45 minutes. Garza asked 12 questions. Every question was precise and relevant, and several of them were questions Avery had already anticipated and had documentation ready for. At one point, Garza stopped and looked at the metadata affidavit from the forensics analyst and was quiet for nearly a full minute. "The counter affidavit," she said. "The one Tyler's lawyers filed. Who was the analyst?" "Firm called Meridian Digital Consulting," Avery said. "Based in the county." Garza wrote that down. Her handwriting was small and even. "And you said Dennis Vaughn met with Patricia Carver this morning?" "Before 8 a.m., 40 minutes. Garza looked at Grant. "You have a source on that?" "Reliable," Grant said. That was all he said, and something in the directness of it apparently satisfied her because she wrote something else down without pressing. "Raymond Coyle," she said, "was in the diner with Tyler for 90 minutes during Lena's shift." Avery slid the phone across with Cash's photos, taken from across the street, clear enough to identify faces. "Coyle is on the county commission. Dennis Vaughn's business association endorsed his appointment." Garza looked at the photos. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise exactly, but the specific tightening of someone whose existing suspicion has just received confirmation. "I know Coyle," she said. She didn't elaborate on how or in what context. She put the phone down. She looked at the table for a moment, at the organized spread of documentation, and then she looked at Avery. "How is Lena Brooks doing?" she said. Not procedurally, actually. "She's working her shift right now because she needs the money, and because she's been managing this alone for 8 months and has learned not to stop moving." Avery kept her voice even. "She's exhausted. She's been afraid for so long that the fear has become part of how she operates. And she has a forensics affidavit she paid for herself over 6 months of diner wages that's been buried under a counter affidavit from a firm in Tyler's father's county." Garza looked at her for a moment. "Okay," she said. She stood up. She put her notebook away. She looked at Grant. "I'm going to need the full documentation package. Everything you showed me. Sent to a secure address I'm going to give you. I'm going to need Lena Brooks to agree to a formal interview, and I'm going to want to do it outside this county." She paused. "I'm also going to make some inquiries about this morning's meeting that don't go through the county DA's office." She said it neutrally, without drama. A woman stating operational parameters. "How long?" Grant said. "I can have something preliminary by end of business today, if what you've given me is as solid as it looks." She picked up her jacket. "I'll need Lena's consent for the interview. That's not optional." "She'll give it," Avery said. Garza looked at her with the level attention of someone taking a reading. "You sure?" "Yes," Avery said. Garza left. The room held its breath for a second. Then Dex, from the corner where he'd been standing the whole time without saying anything, let out a long, slow exhale. "All right," he said. "All right, Custom." The call came at 4:17 p.m. Not from Garza. Not from Whitmore. From Lena. "He's at my apartment," she said. Her voice was different from every other time Avery had heard it. Not the flat professional surface. Not the careful evenness of someone managing themselves. This was stripped down to something underneath all of that. "I came home after my shift and the door was open. He was inside. He'd been in there. He went through my things. My laptop's gone. My folder with all the copies of the police reports. The affidavit. Lena, are you inside right now?" "No, I'm outside on the street. I didn't go in. When I saw the door, I just, stay where you are. Don't go back in. Is anyone on the street near you?" A pause. "A woman with a stroller. 2 men I don't recognize." "Don't move." Avery was already up, already pulling on her jacket, already looking at Grant, who was already reading her face and reaching for his helmet. "I'm 12 minutes from you. Ford is closer. I'm calling him right now. He's going to be there in 5 minutes." "He took the affidavit," Lena said, and for the first time the voice cracked. Not into tears, into something rawer and harder than tears. "He took the only copy I had. It's not the only copy, Avery said. Lena, listen to me. It's not the only copy anymore. We have everything. Everything you gave us. Everything we documented. He cannot take what we've already moved. She was out the motel door, phone pressed to her ear. He didn't take anything that matters. He just thinks he did. A silence. Then, why would he think it's gone if... Because that's what he does, Avery said. He creates the feeling of powerlessness. He wants you to feel like he's taken your ground out from under you. She hit Ford's number on speaker as she crossed the parking lot. He hasn't. I promise you he hasn't. Ford picked up on the first ring. She gave him Lena's location in 8 words. He said 2 minutes and hung up. Grant was beside her. He said nothing. He had his helmet in one hand and his phone in the other, and he was already dialing cash. What? The bike ride to Garfield Street took 11 minutes in traffic, and Avery didn't feel the cold or the wind or anything except the road unrolling under her wheels and the specific quality of urgency that had a shape to it now, a shape made of Tyler Vaughn's face across a diner counter, and Dennis Vaughn's early morning shoes on courthouse tile, and the methodical theft of an 8-month-old woman's evidence, and the particular arrogance of a man who had never in his life encountered a consequence that stuck. She turned onto Garfield and saw Ford's pickup idling at the curb and Lena standing beside the passenger door with her arms crossed over her chest, not in the cold guarding way, in the held-together way. She pulled up and killed the engine. Lena looked at her. Her eyes were dry. Her jaw was set. He left the door open, Lena said. He wanted me to see it. He wanted me to walk in and find everything gone and know it was him, and know he could come in any time he wanted. Her voice had found its floor again. Not calm, not okay, but steady in the way of a woman who had been running on a narrow ledge for 8 months and had not fallen yet. He's sending a message. I know, Avery said. We're sending one back. She looked at Ford. Get her out of this neighborhood, the motel. Don't use the direct route. Ford nodded, and they were moving. Avery called Grant. He broke into her apartment, took the laptop and her paper copies. I know. Cash already called it in. Anonymous tip to the state police non-emergency line. Garza's office will have it in the next 30 minutes. He's accelerating, Avery said. Yes. He thinks we're about to hand Garza something he can't counter. He's trying to destroy source material before it becomes formal evidence. Which means he knows about Garza, Grant said. The street went past her in a blur of wet pavement and streetlights starting to come on in the early dark of the late afternoon. Someone told him, she said. A silence on the phone. Not from us, Grant said. No, not from us. She thought about it, fast. Garza had arrived at 1:53. Garza drove an unmarked vehicle. Nobody at the motel would have known who she was unless they already had eyes on the motel. Tyler's perimeter watcher, whoever had clocked decks following the truck, had to still be active. He's had someone on the motel since at least the night of the drive-by. I know, we need to move. Where? Not here, not Route 9. Grant's voice was decisive. Boots found a garage space through a contact. Private, off Route 9 by 6 miles. We move there tonight. All of us? All of us, including Lena. Grant, if Garza needs to contact us, I'll give her the new number. We can't sit on Route 9 with someone watching the lot. A pause. Avery, he just broke into a woman's apartment and stole evidence. He's not being cautious anymore. He's moving. She understood what that meant. A man who has been patient and methodical for years, who has built his position carefully, who has operated behind layers of distance and deniability. When that man stops being cautious, it is because he has decided that speed is now more important than cover. And a man who decides speed matters more than cover is a man who is afraid that his window is closing. Tyler Vaughn was afraid his window was closing, which meant Garza had rattled something by making calls this afternoon that Tyler's network had felt, which meant Garza was real and moving, and Tyler knew it. Okay, Avery said. We move tonight. The garage was on the edge of an industrial stretch, a cinder block and corrugated metal structure that smelled of old oil and rubber and had 4 bays and a small office in the back with a wood stove that Boots got going within 20 minutes of arrival. They moved in at 7 p.m., bikes first, then the pickup, then a second vehicle Serrano had sourced from a contact who didn't ask questions. They parked Lena in the office with the wood stove and a sleeping bag. Someone produced from a saddlebag and coffee from a gas station run Cash made on the way. She sat in a folding chair with both hands wrapped around the cup, and she didn't speak for a while, and nobody pushed her to. The garage bays were their operations floor now. Grant had the documentation laid out on a workbench, physical copies. Avery had printed at the Motel Business Center before they left. The same copies that were also now uploaded to 3 separate cloud addresses Avery had set up using email accounts Tyler Vaughn had no knowledge of. Tyler had stolen Lena's copies. He had not touched what mattered. Garza called at 7:42. "The break-in's been called in," she said. "I've escalated it to my office as potential evidence tampering in an active investigation. That gives me standing to move faster on the other pieces." A pause. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen before you react." "I'm listening," Avery said. "Patricia Carver's office called me at 5:30 today, asking about the nature of my contact with individuals associated with the Ironback Riders." Garza let that land. "I told them it was in connection with a state-level investigation and referred them to my supervisor. My supervisor is currently receiving a call from Dennis Vaughn's attorney claiming that the state police are interfering in a county matter at the behest of a motorcycle club with criminal associations." "Criminal associations," Avery said. "That's the phrase used. I don't have specifics, but I think you might." A pause. "I need to know what they have on your members, because whatever it is, they're going to use it tonight." Avery looked at Grant across the workbench. He'd heard enough. He gave one nod. She told Garza. Everything. Robbie's deferred sentence, Cash's open civil judgment, Ford's medical license. She said it fast and clean without apology or mitigation. Garza listened. "Okay," she said when Avery finished. "None of that constitutes criminal association in any meaningful legal sense, but that won't stop them from making it sound like it does in a press statement if it comes to that." Another pause. "How many of you are at the current location?" 8. "And Lena?" "Keep it that way. Don't move. I'm working on an emergency protective order for Lena through the state court rather than the county. That takes Carver's office out of the chain entirely." She paused. "I need until morning." "He broke into her apartment this afternoon," Avery said. "I know. That's the evidence tampering flag. I'm using it." Garza's voice had the quality of someone moving fast while sounding calm. "Can you keep her safe for 12 hours? "Yes," Avery said. "Then I need you to do that and let me work. Do not make contact with Tyler Vaughn, Dennis Vaughn, Raymond Coyle, or anyone in their circle. Do not do anything visible. If they can't find you, they can't manufacture another incident tonight." "Understood." Garza hung up. The garage was quiet, except for the wood stove and the wind against the corrugated wall and the distant sound of highway traffic. Grant looked around the bays. 8 people, bikes in a row. 1 woman in the back office with a cup of coffee and 8 months of surviving something she should never have had to survive. "We hold," he said. Nobody argued. At 9:51 p.m., Tyler Vaughn's truck appeared on Garfield Street. Cash was still running a loose watch on the apartment building, from a distance, on foot, in dark clothing, which was how Boots had taught him to do it on the ride over. He texted the group thread a single word, truck. Grant texted back, "Don't move, just watch." Tyler sat outside Lena's building for 26 minutes. Then he got out of the truck. Cash's next text, "He's going in." The building's front door security was, as Dex had noted on day 1, a broken intercom and a door that latched but did not lock properly. Tyler Vaughn had already been in the apartment once today. He knew the building. Cash. 3rd floor light on. He went to her floor. Grant stared at the screen. Avery was beside him, reading over his shoulder. The garage was very quiet. Cash. He's inside her apartment. Grant looked at Avery. The muscle in his jaw moved. Garza said, "Don't..." Avery started. "I know what Garza said. If we move now, it destroys what she's building. If we don't move, he finds out she's not there and we don't know what he does next." He was already reaching for his jacket. "Dad." He stopped, looked at her. She held his gaze. "Call Cash. Tell him to call 911 from a payphone. Active break-in at Lena's address. Give them Tyler's name and plate and description. Let the patrol officers handle the scene." She kept her voice level. "If patrol officers catch Tyler Vaughn inside a victim's apartment while a state police investigation is open, that's the arrest. That's the arrest Garza can build on. But only if it's clean. Only if it's patrol, not us. Grant looked at her for a long moment. The garage sounds filled the space between them. The stove, the wind, the highway. If they don't respond fast enough, he said, Cash stays on it. The second Tyler comes out of that building, Cash is on the phone with Garza directly. She paused. Let the machine work. Garza made the machine work. Let it. Grant was still for 3 full seconds. Then he picked up his phone and called Cash. Payphone, he said. 3 blocks east on Garfield. There's one at the filling station. Call 911. Active break-in at Lena's building, 3rd floor. Tyler Vaughn's truck is outside. Black pickup. Give them the plate. Then you go to the corner of Garfield and Morrow, and you do not move and you do not go near that building. Cash. Copy. Grant lowered the phone. The garage held its breath. Mac was leaning against one of the bikes, arms crossed, watching Grant. He said nothing. He'd said what he needed to say, across every parking lot and motel room and cold night of this thing, and now there was nothing left to say except to wait and see if the structure they'd built held weight when weight was put on it. 11 minutes passed. Cash texted, 2 patrol cars. Then, they're inside. Then, 4 minutes of nothing. Then, neighbors in the hall. Officers coming out. Then, they've got him. A single line, 5 words. The garage stayed silent for 1 more second, and then Dex made a sound that was half exhale and half something that didn't have a name, and Robbie sat down on a crate with his elbows on his knees, and Ford turned away and looked at the corrugated wall, and nobody said anything for a while because there was too much to say, and none of it needed to be said right now. Grant walked to the office at the back of the garage. Lena was sitting exactly where they'd left her, the coffee cup empty in her hands, the wood stove throwing orange light across her face. She looked up when he came in. He said, "They got him." She looked at him. Her face did something complicated and human and entirely beyond description. Not relief exactly, not joy, not the clean emotional resolution of a story ending correctly. Something more like a person who has been holding a wall up with both hands for so long that when someone finally comes to take the weight, the first thing they feel is not gratitude. It is the shock of their own arms, the realization of how long they've been shaking. She set the coffee cup down on the floor with great care, and she put her face in her hands, and she stayed that way for a long time. Grant stood in the doorway of the garage office and did not move and did not speak and did not look away. Outside, far enough away that it was more feeling than sound, a siren moved through the dark and the cold toward Garfield Street, and then past it, and then was gone. His phone buzzed. Garza. He picked it up. "I understand we have an arrest," she said. "Patrol caught him inside the apartment," Grant said. "Clean scene." "Good." A pause. The pause of a woman assembling what this meant for the next 12 hours of her work. "I'm filing for the emergency protective order in the morning. I'll need Lena available for a statement by 9 a.m. She'll be there." "And Grant?" A pause. "Whatever you and your people did or didn't do tonight to keep this clean, I noticed." He said nothing to that. 9 a.m., Garza said, and hung up. He stood in the doorway of the office for another moment, listening to the wood stove and the wind and the quiet breathing of a woman who had just survived something she shouldn't have had to survive. And he thought about the Castor County woman 7 years ago, the one they'd left too soon, the one who had barely survived. And he thought that sometimes you don't get it right the first time, but sometimes you get a second chance to do it the way it should have been done. And then Avery appeared at his shoulder, reading something on her phone. Garza's supervisor pushed back on Dennis Vaughn's attorney, she said. The criminal associations angle didn't hold. They couldn't cite a single active criminal matter. Good. Tyler's being held overnight. No bail hearing until morning. She paused. His father hasn't made a statement. He will. Probably. She looked at her father. In the orange light from the stove, she looked for just a moment, like her mother. The cheekbones, the set of the jaw, the look in her eyes that was not softness exactly, but was the thing that lives next to it in people who have chosen to pay attention to the world. Are you okay? He looked at her. I'm good, he said. Dad. I'm good, Avery. He said it again, and this time it landed differently. Not dismissive, not a performance of okayness, but the statement of a man who was, in this moment, on the right side of a line he'd once crossed too carelessly and had been careful about ever since. She nodded. Behind them, in the bay, Someone had started one of the bikes. Not to ride, just to run, the way you run an engine after a long cold sit to remind it what it is. The sound filled the garage, deep and mechanical and certain, and it rolled through the corrugated walls and out into the night and dissipated into the dark. And in the office, Lena Brooks lifted her face from her hands and looked at the orange light of the wood stove and listened to the sound of the engine. And for the first time in 8 months, she did not look at the door. The wood stove burned low sometime around 3 in the morning, and nobody got up to feed it. Lena had fallen asleep in the folding chair with her head tipped against the cinder block wall, and her arms finally uncrossed, finally loose at her sides, the empty coffee cup on the floor beside her boot. Grant had draped a second sleeping bag over her shoulders at some point without waking her, and then gone back to the bay where Mac was sitting on an overturned crate and Dex was stretched out across the bench seat of the pickup with his jacket over his face. Most of the others were sleeping in whatever position they'd found. Serrano against a tire, Cash on the concrete with a rolled jacket under his head, Boots simply gone, as Boots often was, present somewhere in the dark periphery without being visible. Avery didn't sleep. She sat on the floor of the bay with her back against the cold metal of her Sportster and the laptop open across her knees, and she went through everything one more time. Not because she needed to, not because there was anything left to find or fix, but because the work of going through it was the only thing keeping the adrenaline from turning into something she didn't want to feel yet. The documents, the footage, the metadata affidavit, the chain of custody for every piece of it, clean and unbroken and beyond what Tyler Vaughn's lawyers could reasonably attack. She thought about Tyler sitting in a county holding cell 12 miles away, and she thought about Dennis Vaughn in whatever house he lived in with his county contracts and his plaque in the lobby and his son's mess finally out in the open where all the money in the world was going to have a harder time burying it. She thought about the Castor County woman her father had never named, the one who had survived barely. She thought about the specific weight her father had carried from that, the way it lived in him quietly, not as guilt exactly, but as a permanent alteration, the kind of thing that changes the calibration of how careful you decide to be. She closed the laptop. Outside, the dark was the particular dense dark of 4 a.m., the hour when the night has fully committed to itself before the first gray of morning begins to argue with it. The highway was almost silent. Wind moved against the corrugated walls, somewhere far off, a train. She thought, we didn't fix everything. She thought, Tyler will get a lawyer and the lawyer will be good, and Dennis Vaughn has money and this will be long and ugly before it's over. She thought, but she slept. She actually slept. And that was something. That was in fact the thing that mattered most right now. Not the arrest, not the evidence, not the emergency protective order Garza was going to file in the morning. The thing that mattered most was that Lena Brooks was asleep in a folding chair in an industrial garage with her arms uncrossed and the door unwatched, and she had not startled once in 3 hours. Avery tipped her head back against the bike and closed her eyes and was asleep in 4 minutes. Garza was at the State Police Regional Office in Kellerton by 7:30. She called Grant at 7:46 and told him what the overnight had produced. The patrol officers who had responded to the 911 call at Lena's building had found Tyler Vaughn in the apartment with Lena's stolen laptop in his hands, and the drawer of the filing cabinet he'd already ransacked still open. He had not been able to talk his way out of it. There was no reasonable interpretation of a man standing in his ex-wife's apartment at 10 p.m. with her property in his hands after she had a restraining order against him. He'd tried. The patrol report noted that he had been calm and articulate and had attempted to explain that Lena had given him permission to retrieve some shared property. But since Lena had not been present and could not be reached, Grant had made sure of that, keeping her phone off and her location unknown. There was no one to corroborate the claim. He'd been charged with breaking and entering, evidence tampering, and violation of the restraining order. 3 separate charges. The evidence tampering flag, which Garza had pushed through before the arrest, meant that the laptop was now considered potential evidence in an active state investigation and could not be returned to Tyler or his lawyers without going through Garza's office first. "What's on it?" Grant said. "We're finding out," Garza said. "Whatever he was looking for, or looking to destroy, we have it now instead of him." A pause. "His bail hearing is at 10 a.m. I've submitted a formal opposition to release on the grounds of evidence tampering and the pattern of stalking behavior. Whether the judge takes that seriously depends on the judge. Dennis Vaughn's attorney will be there." I expect so. Garza's voice was flat and professional. I'll also be there, which is different from any prior proceeding Tyler Vaughn has been involved in. Grant said, "What do you need from us this morning?" Lena, 9 a.m. My office in Kellerton. Everything else I can work with what you've already given me. She paused. And Grant, you and your people stay out of the bail hearing. I know that's not what you want to hear. But if any Ironback riders are visible in that courthouse, Dennis Vaughn's attorney will make the next hour about that instead of about Tyler. Understood, Grant said. He put the phone down and looked across the garage bay. Avery was awake, had been awake long enough to have made a run for coffee, 8 cups in a cardboard carrier from the gas station 3 miles east, and was distributing them with the silent efficiency of someone who understood that the morning required caffeine before it required conversation. Garza needs Lena at 9, he said. Avery handed him a cup. She's up. She's been up since 6:30. How is she? Avery thought about it honestly, the way she always thought about things when Grant asked, not reaching for the reassuring answer, but actually assessing. Scared about the bail hearing, worried Tyler gets out and it starts again, but she paused. Different scared, not the scared of someone who's alone. Grant nodded. He drank his coffee. It was bad coffee, thin and overheated, and it was the best thing he'd tasted in 2 days. Ford drove Lena to Kellerton at 8:15, taking the state route rather than the county roads, and Avery rode alongside in case of anything she couldn't name and needed to be ready for anyway. The morning was cold and flat and pale, the kind of early November morning that hasn't decided yet whether it's going to clear or close in, and the road was mostly empty that early on a weekday. Lena sat in the front seat of the pickup and looked out the window the whole way. She'd borrowed a change of clothes from a bag Avery kept in her saddlebag. An old gray sweater, dark jeans, close enough in size to not look borrowed. She'd pulled her hair back. She looked like herself, Avery thought, in a way that was different from the Millie's Diner version of herself. Not the performance of a woman managing, but the actual face underneath it. She didn't talk much on the ride. Once, somewhere past the county line, she said, "What if the judge lets him out?" Ford kept his eyes on the road. Then the order's still in place, and Garza's case is still building, and we're still here. Lena was quiet for a moment. You can't be here forever. No, Ford said, but forever's not what today needs. She looked at him. He was watching the road, his big hands easy on the wheel, his profile the profile of a man who had seen enough of the worst things and come out the other side of them and learned, somewhere in that process, how to be still without being empty. How do you do that? She said. Just take it one thing at a time, when the whole thing feels like it's going to fall on you. Ford thought about it. Not the quick, reflexive answer, the actual thought. You stop trying to carry the whole thing at once, he said. You just carry today. Today, Tyler's in a cell and you're in this truck and we're going to Kellerton. That's today. Tomorrow, we'll carry tomorrow. Lena looked back out the window. That sounds simple. It isn't, Ford said. I know it isn't. She nodded slowly and didn't say anything else until they reached Kellerton. Garza's office was on the second floor of the state police building, a room that had the organized austerity of a person who moved fast and didn't have time for decoration, 2 filing cabinets, a desk stacked with folders and a system only. Garza understood, a window with a view of the parking lot that she probably never looked out of. She shook Lena's hand when they came in and gestured to the chair across the desk without ceremony. Avery waited in the hallway. She could hear the low register of voices through the door. Not the words, just the cadence, the rhythm of a question and an answer, and then a longer answer, the particular rhythm of someone being asked to go back through something hard and being given enough room to do it at their own pace. It took an hour and 40 minutes. When Lena came out, her eyes were red at the edges and her jaw was set, and she had the look of someone who had just lifted something very heavy and was going to feel it in their bones tomorrow, but had not dropped it. She looked at Avery. She believed me, she said, just that. I know, Avery said, the whole thing, the texts, the doctor's letter, the early contact with the police. She'd already pulled Tyler's name through the state database, and there's 2 other women, before me. Lena's voice was careful and deliberate, the way you speak when you're holding yourself together by being very precise with words. Neither of them filed charges. Both of them moved out of the county. One of them moved out of state. She paused. I didn't know that. I thought I was the first time he'd done this. Avery held the information. The particular cold of it. Not the violence Tyler had done, which was horrible, but the system of it, the repetition, the fact that two women had disappeared into silence before Lena had ever called the police for the first time. Those women, Lena said, they're going to be contacted. Garza's going to contact them. She pressed her lips together. If they'll talk. Maybe they will, Avery said. Maybe knowing it finally caught up to him changes what they're willing to do. Lena looked at the floor of the hallway and then back up. Or maybe they've spent years building a life somewhere he isn't, and being asked to come back into this is the worst thing anyone could ask them to do. She said it without bitterness, with the careful fairness of someone who understood that there were many ways to survive something, and not all of them included turning back around to face it. I don't get to judge that. No, Avery said. You don't. They stood in the hallway for a moment, the building sounds around them. A phone somewhere, footsteps, a door. The bail hearing's at 10, Avery said. Garza's opposing release. We don't know yet. I know. Lena straightened. Can we get coffee somewhere? Real coffee, not gas station. There's a place on the main street. Ford found it. Okay, Lena said. Okay, let's do that. Tyler Vaughn did not get bail. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Patel, who had been on the family court bench for 14 years before moving to criminal, and who had, Garza later told Avery, a particular and well-documented lack of patience for men who violated protective orders, looked at the three charges, looked at Garza's opposition filing, looked at Tyler's lawyer's argument that his client was a community member with deep local ties and no flight risk, and set a detention hearing for 1 week out with Tyler remanded in the interim. Garza called Avery at 11:43 with the result, and Avery walked to the coffee shop window where Lena was sitting with her hands around a real cup of real coffee, and she said, "He stays in." Lena looked at her. Something crossed her face. Relief, yes, but not the clean, uncomplicated relief of a problem solved. Something more tangled. The relief of a person who has been braced for impact for so long that the absence of impact doesn't feel like safety yet. It feels like waiting for the impact to arrive from a different direction. For how long, she said. At least a week. Garza's building toward something longer. Avery sat down across from her. This isn't over. You know that. I know. His lawyers are going to fight. Dennis Vaughn is going to spend money. It's going to be in front of a judge eventually, and Tyler is very good at seeming reasonable. I know that too. Lena looked at her coffee. But it's different now. It's different because it's not just me saying it. It's Garza saying it. It's the state saying it. And it's... She stopped. He took my copies of everything. He went into my apartment to take my copies because he thought if he took them, I'd have nothing left. That's what he thought of me. That I was one locked door away from having nothing. She looked up. He was wrong. Yes, Avery said. He was. They sat in the coffee shop for another 30 minutes without talking very much, which was its own kind of conversation. The Ironback riders stayed 4 more days. Not because there was a crisis requiring them. The immediate danger had shifted. The legal machinery was moving. Garza was working with a focus and a seriousness that left Grant with something he rarely felt about institutional processes, which was cautious confidence. They stayed because Grant had said all the way through in a motel parking lot 3 days ago, and he meant it, and because Avery had watched her father say it and knew that for him it was not a statement of intention, but a statement of fact. They stayed because leaving felt wrong until the shape of Lena's life going forward was at least visible on the horizon, even if it was still far off. There were practical things. Ford drove Lena to find a new apartment. She couldn't go back to Garfield, couldn't sleep in a space where Tyler had stood at 10 p.m. going through her filing cabinet, and she didn't want to anyway. They found a place on the north side of the city, 2nd floor, actual security door, a landlord who was a woman in her 50s with a direct manner who looked at Lena's situation without flinching and said the pet policy was flexible if the pet was small and well-behaved. It was more expensive than Garfield by $60 a month, and Lena said she'd figure it out, and Dex, who said nothing to anyone about this afterward, slipped an envelope into the stack of paperwork on the landlord's desk that covered the security deposit. Avery helped her move. There wasn't much. What Tyler hadn't stolen she'd been able to retrieve with a police escort, which Garza's office had arranged with a professionalism and courtesy that was different enough from Lena's previous experiences with law enforcement that it made the difference visible in how Lena held herself through it. Her laptop was still in evidence. Garza told her it would be returned when the investigation allowed. In the meantime, Avery found a refurbished one online and had it delivered to the new address before Lena's first night there. Mac helped carry boxes. He did it without speaking, which was how Mac helped with most things. And when the last box was in and the new keys were on the kitchen counter, he looked around the apartment with the appraising attention of a man assessing structural integrity and said, "Good door." Lena looked at him. "What?" "The door. It's solid. The frame is solid." He knocked on it with one knuckle. "Some of them are hollow core. This one isn't." He looked at her. "Good apartment." It was the longest thing Mac had said to Lena directly across the entire 10 days. She seemed to understand instinctively that it was significant. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the observation about the door." Mac nodded and went back down to help with the last load. The thing about Dennis Vaughn was that he did not disappear. Grant had known he wouldn't. A man like Dennis Vaughn, built from 40 years of operating in a county where his name was on contracts and plaques and the lips of people who owed him, didn't fold because his son got arrested. He made calls. He retained people. He managed. What he found, when he looked at what Garza had built and what the Ironback writers had documented, was that there was not a clean way to make it go away this time. The fabricated texts, the messages Tyler had sent from Lena's phone to his secondary device across what Garza's forensic team now confirmed was a period of 14 months, were the fulcrum everything else rested on. The metadata analysis Lena had paid for with 6 months of diner wages had been correct. Meridian Digital Consulting, the firm Tyler's lawyers had used to file the counter-affidavit, turned out to have a billing relationship with a subsidiary of Vaughn Aggregate Supply that predated the affidavit by 3 years. Garza found it in 4 hours of financial record requests. It was not subtle once someone was looking at it with the right lens and the willingness to actually look. Dennis Vaughn's attorney released a statement saying the billing relationship was routine and unrelated to the affidavit. Nobody with any standing in the proceeding believed this, and more importantly, nobody with any standing in the proceeding was now in a position to pretend they believed it without consequences for themselves. That was what changed. Not that the truth became visible. The truth had always been visible to anyone willing to see it. What changed was that the cost of choosing not to see it became real. Patricia Carver's office quietly withdrew the inquiry into the Ironback writers. No statement, no explanation. Just a notice to Garza's supervisor that the matter had been reviewed and found insufficient for further action. Garza told Avery about this on the phone with the neutral delivery of someone reporting a weather forecast. Raymond Coyle did not appear at any subsequent proceeding. His name came up once in the discovery process and then receded, which was the specific way of men like Coyle, never quite present enough to be caught, never quite absent enough to be clean, always at the careful edge of implication without crossing into it. Grant thought about him occasionally and said nothing about it. Some things you noted and carried and accepted would not be fully resolved, because the world was full of men like Raymond Coyle, who existed in the margins of other people's wrongdoing and outlasted the proceedings because they were never quite central enough to prosecute. That was a true and ugly thing, and Grant knew it, and Avery knew it, and Lena eventually knew it too, and knowing it didn't stop any of them from being glad about what did get resolved. The trial, when it came, was 4 months later. Avery was not there for most of it. The Ironback writers had ridden home 12 days after the arrest, after the new apartment was settled and the immediate structure of Lena's safety was in place, and Garza had looked Grant in the eye and told him she had what she needed and would use it. They rode out on a Thursday morning, all 8 bikes, the cold November air hitting them broadside on Route 9, and Avery had looked back once at the diner as they passed Millie's. The sign visible from the road, the parking lot with its cracked asphalt, the front windows reflecting gray morning light, and then looked back at the road ahead. She followed this proceedings the way you follow something from a distance, through Garza's periodic updates and through Lena's texts, which had become a regular thing, not daily, not intensive, but consistent in the way that suggested something that had started as crisis contact and evolved into something that didn't have a clean category name. A connection. The kind that forms between people who have been through something real together and can't entirely unknow each other afterward. Lena's texts were often mundane. A photo of the cat she'd finally gotten, a gray tabby named Carl, which was a deeply unglamorous name for a cat, and which Avery found inexplicably perfect. Updates about a new job she'd taken at a small accounting firm, entry level, using a bookkeeping certificate she'd started 3 years ago before Tyler had found reasons for her to stop attending class. A text one Tuesday afternoon that just said, "First day." Didn't think about him once until the drive home. That felt different. Avery texted back, "That's everything." Lena, "Not everything, but something." Avery, "Yeah, something." The trial produced what Garza had built it to produce. Tyler Vaughn was convicted on the breaking and entering charge, the evidence tampering charge, and 4 counts of violating the protective order, including the diner incident, which 3 witnesses, the retired checkers players, and the trucker who'd been at the counter that afternoon, had agreed to testify about. The fabricated text message scheme was presented to the jury by Garza's forensic expert, and the counter affidavit's compromised origins were laid out in enough detail that Tyler's lawyers spent more time trying to distance Tyler from Meridian Digital Consulting than they spent defending the actual charges, which is what happens when the foundation of a defense collapses before the defense can stand on it. The assault charge, the broken fingers from 4 years into the marriage, the bruise on Lena's arm from 8 months of stalking, those were harder, older. Tyler's lawyers fought the timeline, fought the documentation, fought the characterization of the grip bruise as intentional rather than incidental. One of the 2 women from before Lena testified. Her name was Marcia, and she had driven 12 hours from where she'd rebuilt her life to sit in a courtroom and look at Tyler Vaughn across a room for the first time in 6 years and tell a jury what those years had cost her. The other woman sent a written statement that Garza's office entered into the record. She could not be in the same state as Tyler Vaughn, and she had said so plainly, and the judge had accepted the written statement without requiring her physical presence, which was the correct and decent thing to do. Tyler received a sentence of 4 years on the combined charges, with eligibility for parole review at 2.5. His lawyers immediately filed notice of appeal. Dennis Vaughn was not in the courtroom for the sentencing. His attorney issued a statement calling the verdict the product of a biased process and promising vigorous appellate review. The statement was reported in 2 local outlets and then disappeared, because statements from men protecting convicted abusers have a short half-life once the conviction is real and on the record. Lena was in the courtroom. She sat in the front row of the gallery with a woman named Dina from the diner on one side of her, and on the other side, a seat that was empty for the first 10 minutes and then was filled by Avery, who had ridden 4 hours that morning to be there and had not told Lena she was coming because she hadn't been certain until she was already on the highway that she was going to make it. She sat down. Lena looked at her. She didn't say anything for a moment, then, "You didn't have to." "I know," Avery said. "How long did it take you to get here?" "While." Lena looked back at the front of the courtroom. Her hands were folded in her lap. She was wearing a dark blazer over a white shirt, and her hair was down, and she looked like a person who had made deliberate choices about how she was going to show up for this particular hour of her life. "I'm nervous," she said quietly. "That's okay. What if when they say it, the sentence, what if I just—" She stopped. "I've been holding it together for so long, I don't know what happens when I don't have to anymore." Avery looked at her. "You fall apart a little," she said, "and then you put it back together. And the putting it back together is different than the last time because you're not doing it alone and you're not doing it afraid." She paused. "That's all. That's what happens." Lena held her gaze for a second. She nodded once, small and certain. When the sentence was read, she did not fall apart in the courtroom. She sat very still with her hands folded and her jaw set, and she listened to the words, and she breathed them in, and she let them be real. Dina put a hand over hers. Avery sat with her shoulder 2 inches from Lena's shoulder, close enough to be felt. It was in the parking lot afterward, standing in the pale winter light with the courthouse behind them, and the sound of city traffic around them, that something in Lena's face finally changed. Not broke, nothing so dramatic as that, but released, the way a fist releases when it's been clenched long enough that the hand has forgotten what open feels like, and then, slowly, remembers. She stood in the parking lot and she looked at the sky for a long moment and she breathed. Dina had her arm around her. Avery stood a few feet away and gave her room for it, because some moments are not for witnesses. After a while, Lena looked over at her. "Carl knocked my coffee off the counter this morning," she said. Avery stared at her. "What?" "I was late because I was cleaning it up. The whole cup, just—" She made a gesture with both hands. Dropped, gone. He looked me directly in the eye when he did it. "Lena!" "He's a menace," she said. And then she laughed. It was not a performance. It was the laughter of a person who has found something genuinely funny at the exact moment when funny was necessary. And it was real and slightly too loud. And Dina laughed with her, and Avery stood in the parking lot watching these two women laugh in the winter sun, and she felt something uncurl in her chest that she didn't immediately have a name for. Not happiness exactly. Something more specific. The feeling of having been present for something that mattered and seeing it arrive at the place it needed to arrive. She called her father from the road, 2 hours into the ride home. He picked up after 3 rings, and she could hear wind on his end, which meant he was outside. "Well," he said. 4 years. Evidence tampering, breaking and entering. 4 counts on the order violations. A silence. Not a surprise silence. The silence of a man letting something settle into its proper place. "Garza?" he said. "She was good," Avery said. "She was very good." "And Lena?" "She was there. She held it." She paused. Marcia testified. Another silence. "The woman from before." "She drove 12 hours. That's—" Grant stopped, started again. "That's something." "Yeah." Avery moved through a long curve in the highway, the bike leaning into it with the easy physics of a machine doing what it was built to do. "How's Mac?" "Mac is Mac. He asked about the verdict this morning without asking about the verdict, made coffee for everyone, and then went and sat on his bike in the parking lot for 45 minutes. Avery smiled. It was involuntary. "That sounds right." "It does." A pause. "Robbie got a call from his daughter this morning. She lost a tooth." "How old is she now?" 6. 6.5, apparently. The half matters a lot at 6.5. The highway opened out ahead of her, long and straight and pale in the winter light. The fields on either side gone to frost, the sky the particular hard, clean blue of a cold day that had no interest in being anything other than cold and clear. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." "Castor County," she said. Just those 2 words. A long pause. The wind on his end. "I know," he said quietly. I'm not saying it to—" "I know you're not." He was quiet again. "But you're right to say it." Another pause. "We did better this time." "We did," she said. "We stayed." "We stayed," he agreed. She rode in silence for a while, and he stayed on the line without speaking, which was something he'd always been able to do that most people couldn't. Be present on a phone without filling the space, letting the connection be enough without requiring it to be a conversation. After a while, he said, "She gonna be okay?" Avery thought about the parking lot, Carl the cat, and the knocked-over coffee, and the laughter that came from a real place. "Not right away," she said honestly. "There's the appeal. There's a lot of rebuilding. She's got a long way to go." She paused. "But she's not afraid of the door anymore." Grant made a sound that wasn't words. "That's enough to start," he said. "Yeah," Avery said. "That's enough to start." Well, 4 months after the trial, a card arrived at the Ironback Writers chapter address. A return address in the city, written in the deliberate handwriting of someone who'd thought carefully about every word before committing it to paper. Grant opened it at the kitchen table of the chapter house with his coffee going cold beside him, and he read it once and then set it down and sat with it for a while. It wasn't long. Lena had not tried to make it long. She had written what needed to be said and stopped there, which was its own kind of eloquence. She said the appeal had been filed and her lawyer, a woman from the State Victim Advocacy Office who had taken the case on reduced fees, was handling it and was good, and Lena was not losing sleep over it the way she once would have. She said Carl had gotten bigger and more destructive and she had no regrets. She said she had finished the bookkeeping certificate in February and had been offered a full-time position at the accounting firm starting in the spring. She said she thought about all of them, The whole unlikely group of people who had come into her life through a roadside diner and a card left on a counter, and she didn't have the right words for what that meant to her, so she was not going to try to find them, but she wanted them to know. And then at the bottom of the card, in slightly smaller handwriting, as if it had been added after she'd thought she was done, Avery. You noticed. That was the first thing. Before anything else, you just noticed. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't. I try not to think about it. But I know what did happen because you did. Thank you for that. Thank you for staying. Grant put the card back in its envelope. He picked up his coffee and found it cold and drank it anyway. Mac came in from outside and poured himself a cup without looking over. What's that? Mac said. Card, Grant said. Mac poured his coffee. He didn't ask who from. He already knew, the way Mac knew most things. Quietly, without making a production of it. He sat down across the table. He looked at the envelope. He wrapped both hands around his cup. Good, he said. That was all. Just the word. Simple and complete. The way Mac said most things that mattered. Not decorated, not explained, not softened. Just stated plainly as fact. Grant nodded. Outside, someone started a bike. The sound of it came through the walls of the chapter house, deep and steady, and it ran for a while in the cold morning air, and then it was joined by another, and then all of them at once, that specific full-chested roar of several engines finding their rhythm together. And it lasted for a moment that was longer than a moment, resonant and real. And then they moved, and the sound of them moved with them, receding down the road the way all sounds recede, growing smaller by degrees until what remained was just the road itself, and the morning, and the ordinary silence of a world that continued on. Some people build their lives around institutions, around systems, around structures designed to protect and arbitrate and resolve. Those structures matter. Garza mattered. The judge mattered. The courtroom mattered. None of what happened to Lena would have ended the way it ended without those things functioning, finally, the way they were supposed to function. But there is a space that exists before those structures activate, a gap between the moment when someone is in danger and the moment when the official response arrives. And that space is where people fall through, where they have always fallen through, where Lena had been falling for 8 months before a woman on a motorcycle noticed the way she held her arm at a diner counter and decided that noticing was not enough. The Ironback riders did not close that gap with violence or with intimidation or with the particular performance of menace that people who don't know them would expect. They closed it with patience and documentation and the willingness to stay when staying was inconvenient and when the situation was more complicated than any of them had expected, and when there were real personal costs to the people doing the staying. That is not a story about outlaws being secretly good. It is a story about people, imperfect, complicated, carrying their own damage and their own histories and their own reasons for being who they are, deciding that someone else's safety was worth more than their convenience. That decision does not require perfection. It does not require a clean record or an uncomplicated past or the kind of righteousness that photographs well. It requires only that you look at someone who is being hurt and refuse to look away. Avery Cole looked, and then she stayed. And that was in the end the whole of it.